Today, you will learn how to make this stylized crosshatching shader in Blender. Essentially, what we're going to do is look for shadows on our mesh and then replace them with our crosshatching texture, based on how dark the shadow is. First, you'll need a crosshatching texture. I found this just on the internet. Make sure the background is pure white and the lines are black. I would recommend also having a dense version of the texture. I just made this in Photoshop. Now in Blender, go to the material and delete the principled shader. Then add a diffuse, a shader to RGB, and a separate color, and set it to HSV. The value is what will tell us where the shadows are. The lower it is, the darker the shadow. Run this through a multiply and set it to 1. This gives us more control over the shadow detection. I'll explain more later. Now is where we introduce the hatching texture. So add an image texture and a mapping and coordinates node, and scale the mapping until the lines are as thin as you'd like. Now we want to overlay this texture only in places that meet a certain shadow threshold. To do this, add a mix color node and set it to multiply. Plug the texture into the B slot, and now the A slot is the color of the sphere. Next, add a color ramp and plug the value multiply into its factor, then its output into the color multiply. This color ramp is how we decide the threshold for how dark the shadow needs to be until we overlay the texture. The distance between the black and white determines how sharp the fall off is. I like the values of 0.6 for the white and 0.61 for the black. This produces a very sharp fall off. Make sure the black is on the right side. Now this is the basic setup for the crosshatching shader. All we have to do is duplicate it a few times in order to overlay more lines. Duplicate these 5 nodes and plug the old multiply into the new multiply. Make sure the color ramp is hooked into the value multiply. At first you won't see any changes, but that is because we need to change the mapping node. Rotate it to your liking. Then, we need to set the threshold of the color ramp to be lower, so that the lines only appear in even darker areas. Now you can see what we're going for. I'm going to repeat this step 2 more times, this time using the dense crosshatching texture. I like to reduce the scale of the mapping to give us thicker, bolder lines. The values I use for the color ramps are 0.2, 0.21, and 0.1, 0.11. Now that's all for the basic tutorial, but now I'll show you some more advanced techniques. First of all, what if you wanted to apply a texture to the mesh? Well, it's very easy. Just plug a texture node into the very first color multiply. The problem is that it looks very flat and plain. Now we can use a principled shader in order to give us more control. Just swap it out with a diffuse. The cool thing about this is that we can use a bump map. I find it looks best if it's more subtle. If you want, you can plug your texture into the base color of the principled. This will add the crosshatching overlay into the dark spots of the texture and the shadows. As you can see, it's all screwed up now. This is why we added the value multiply in the beginning. Adjust it until it looks good. There's a lot of experimenting you can do, so go for what is best for your needs. Another thing you can do, if you're animating, keyframe the location of the mapping nodes so that they slide over time. This gives a more hand-drawn feel to the animation. Looks best with a low frame rate. Anyways, that's all for the tutorial. Give me a like if you learned something. Thanks for watching.